The crystal chandelier glimmered above the long dining table, its light falling across polished silver and untouched wine glasses. Yet the air was heavy, so heavy that even the servants standing along the wall dared not breathe too loud. At the far end sat Richard Caldwell, a billionaire with a face carved in stone, his suit perfect, his tie unyielding. He didn't look at her. Not once. Beside the door, her hands trembling against her apron, stood Naomi Harris, the maid. Her heart thundered louder than the silence. She had kept his secret for months, swallowing the shame, hiding her swelling belly behind loose uniforms and bowed eyes. But now it was impossible to hide. Whispers had already started among the staff, glances stolen in the halls, and tonight, as Naomi's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, Richard's cold voice sliced through the room like glass. "You will say nothing. To no one." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt the weight of his denial crush her chest. The child inside her fluttered, as if sensing the storm. Naomi lowered her eyes, a tear clinging stubbornly to her lashes. But this was only the beginning. The Caldwell estate was a fortress of glass and marble, perched high above the city like a watchful king. Every morning the sun spilled across its manicured gardens, the fountains whispering in rhythm with the rustle of leaves. To outsiders it was paradise. To those who worked inside, it was a gilded cage. Naomi Harris had been part of this house for nearly 3 years. She'd come from Atlanta, chasing work that paid better than the endless cycle of diner shifts and babysitting gigs. Richard Caldwell had seemed at first distant but fair. The kind of man who barely acknowledged his staff but made sure they were paid well enough to keep them silent. Naomi learned quickly. Speak only when spoken to. Move like a shadow, and never forget your place. Yet beneath her quiet, disciplined movements, she carried dreams. She wanted stability, a future where she wouldn't have to count quarters at a laundromat, a future where her little sister back home could finish college without working 3 jobs. But Richard had noticed her. Not with kindness, not with respect, with something colder, something that made her stomach twist the first time she felt his gaze linger too long. Richard Caldwell, at 52, was a man carved from success. CEO of a tech empire, his name appeared on Forbes lists and glossy magazines. To the public, he was charming, philanthropic, the kind of man who cut ribbons at charity events and donated millions to hospitals. But inside the house, his presence commanded fear. His footsteps echoed like judgment, his silence could chill a room, and his words, when he chose to speak them, carried the weight of finality. His wife, Margaret Caldwell, had once been the jewel of high society, elegant, poised, the picture of grace in every magazine spread. But years of distance, of secrets whispered behind closed doors, had left her brittle. She no longer looked at Richard with admiration, but with a quiet calculation, as though measuring what it would cost her to stay, and what it would cost her to leave. Naomi's pregnancy wasn't planned. It wasn't wanted, not by him. The night Richard crossed the line was burned into her memory. His words of reassurance had sounded like promises, but they were empty, gone by morning. She had carried the shame in silence, terrified of losing her job, scared of being cast out with nothing but a child and no safety net. Each day, she moved carefully through the house, pressing her uniform tighter, praying no one noticed. But people always noticed Cliff Martinez, the head butler, had been in the Caldwell house longer than anyone else. A tall man in his late 60s, his hair silver but his back unbent. He had seen scandals bloom and die within these walls. His sharp eyes often softened when they met Naomi's. He suspected more than she wanted him to, but he said nothing. Not yet. One evening, as Naomi cleared the table, Cliff leaned close, his voice low. "You need to be careful, child. Secrets don't last long in this house." Naomi froze, her hands gripping the silver tray so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to deny it, to pretend she didn't understand, but the kindness in Cliff's eyes undid her. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them down. "I'll be fine," she whispered. Though her heart knew it wasn't true, Naomi discovers she's being watched. Later that night, while Naomi folded linens in the laundry room, she felt it, a gaze. Turning quickly, she saw Anna, one of the younger maids, standing in the doorway. Anna's arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. "You've been sick a lot lately," Anna said, her tone edged with curiosity. Or was it suspicion? "Cliff's been covering for you." Naomi's pulse spiked. She forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just tired, that's all." Anna lingered a second too long before walking away. Naomi's knees nearly buckled once she was alone again. The walls of the Caldwell estate weren't walls at all. They were mirrors, reflecting every secret until it became impossible to hide. Meanwhile, Richard carried on as though nothing existed beyond his empire and his pristine reputation. At work, he was ruthless, firing executives who faltered, demanding perfection from those who remained. At home, he played the role of a distant husband, sitting through dinners with Margaret in silence. His phone more important than her words, but every so often, his eyes flickered toward Naomi, and every time she felt her chest constrict. He wasn't thinking of her as a person, just as a problem he needed to silence. Margaret notices. One late afternoon, Margaret watched Naomi arranging flowers in the grand hall. The sunlight caught Naomi's face, highlighting the tension she carried. Margaret tilted her head, her sharp instincts prickling. She had lived long enough with Richard to recognize the signs, the quiet avoidance, the way Naomi flinched when Richard's voice filled a room. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing, but in her silence, Naomi felt the weight of suspicion grow heavier. That night, Naomi lay awake in her small servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling. She pressed her hands over her belly, whispering to the life growing inside. "I'll protect you. No matter what, somehow, I'll protect you." Her words wavered in the darkness, a vow she wasn't sure she could keep. David Harris, Naomi's younger brother, called her the next day. His voice was warm, tired, carrying the weight of responsibility he wasn't ready for. He was studying back home in Georgia, working nights to cover what scholarships couldn't. "You sound off, sis," he said. "Everything okay?" Naomi hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything. But what could he do? He was barely holding himself together. So she smiled through the phone. "I'm fine, just busy. You focus on school, okay?" But her voice cracked at the end, and David noticed. He always noticed. "Naomi," he said softly, "you can tell me anything. You know that, right?" Her throat burned. "I know." When the call ended, Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. The walls seemed to close in again, suffocating her with secrets. And somewhere down the hall, Richard's footsteps echoed, steady, unforgiving, but secrets in the Caldwell house never stayed hidden for long. Naomi's secret grew heavier with each passing week. The once loose uniforms could no longer disguise the curve of her stomach. Every mirror in the house felt like an accusation, every passing glance like a silent judgment. The whispers among the staff became louder, though no one dared speak openly. Still, Naomi felt them cut into her back like knives when she entered a room. And Richard? He pretended nothing existed. When his eyes did land on her, they carried one unspoken command: stay silent. One night, Naomi slipped into the laundry room long after midnight. The hum of the dryer was the only sound. She pressed her hands against her stomach, whispering to the unborn child. "What am I going to do with you?" Her voice cracked, tears stinging her eyes. "How am I supposed to raise you in a world where people like me don't get chances? And your father?" She bit her lip hard. "Your father would rather erase you than claim you." A shadow shifted in the doorway. She turned, startled. Cliff stood there, his expression etched with worry. "You can't keep this to yourself much longer," he said softly. Naomi froze. "Cliff, please." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've seen this house bury people before. If you let them, they'll bury you too. You need a plan, child, and you can't make it alone." Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to deny everything. But Cliff's eyes, kind, unflinching, drew the truth out of her silence. 2 days later, Naomi was in the kitchen when Margaret Caldwell walked in. The room went still. The other staff busied themselves, but Naomi's heart thudded in her ears. Margaret's eyes lingered on her belly. Her voice was calm, cold. Do you think I don't notice? Naomi's throat closed. She gripped the counter for support. Margaret stepped closer, her perfume sharp, her presence suffocating. Richard has ruined many lives. Don't think you're the first. Naomi swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Mrs. Caldwell, Margaret cut her off. Spare me the lies. If you think he'll protect you, you're a fool. For a moment, Naomi thought she might collapse. But then Margaret's voice softened, just slightly. You have a choice. Stay silent and be discarded. Or find a way to make your truth undeniable. Naomi blinked, stunned. Was this advice or a threat? She couldn't tell. Margaret turned and left without another word, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Naomi pressed her back to the counter, her chest heaving. Undeniable. The word clung to her like a lifeline. That night, Naomi sat on the floor of her tiny room with a notebook on her lap. Her hands shook as she wrote, "Save money secretly, collect evidence. Don't let Richard control the story," she whispered to herself, almost chanting, "I won't let him erase us." Cliff found her hours later, still awake, still writing. He leaned against the doorframe. "You've got that fire in your eyes." "I've seen it before. Just be careful. Fire burns both ways." Naomi gave a small, weary smile. "If I don't fight, I lose everything anyway." A week later, Naomi received a call during her short break. It was David. His voice carried panic. "Naomi, the landlord's raising the rent. If I don't pay by next month, I'll lose the place." Her stomach dropped. "David, I don't have enough saved." "You've always looked out for me," he said desperately. "But you sound different." "What's going on with you?" Her hand pressed against her belly instinctively. Silence stretched. "Naomi?" David's voice was tight. She forced a laugh. "I'm just tired." "I'll figure something out. Don't worry about me." When she hung up, Naomi broke. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting for her child. She was fighting for her entire family. Richard began to notice the shift. Naomi wasn't as silent anymore. She moved differently, carried herself with a quiet defiance. And he hated it. One evening, he cornered her in the hallway. His voice was low, sharp. "You will not embarrass me, Naomi. Do you understand?" Her breath hitched. "This is your child, too." His eyes blazed. "Not if I say it isn't." The words sliced her open. But beneath the pain, something hardened inside her. She looked him in the eye, her voice steady. "One day, everyone will see the truth, and you won't be able to deny it." For the first time, Richard faltered. His jaw tightened, but there was fear in his eyes. Late one night, Naomi crept into Richard's study. The air smelled of leather and whiskey. On his desk sat a stack of photos from a recent charity gala. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through them, Richard smiling for cameras, shaking hands, pretending to be the perfect man. But in one barely noticeable, her reflection appeared in the background. His hand was on her arm. Too close. Too familiar. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was a start. She slipped the photo into her apron pocket, her heart racing. From the doorway, Cliff's voice startled her. "You're playing with fire, Naomi." She turned, clutching the photo. "Then let him burn!" The tension in the Caldwell house grew unbearable. Staff avoided eye contact, afraid of becoming collateral in a war they didn't understand. Margaret watched with hawk-like precision. Richard grew more volatile, snapping at the most minor mistakes. And Naomi? She walked taller. Every step she took carried the weight of defiance. She had a plan now, fragile, but real. At night, she dreamed of her child's eyes that would carry the undeniable truth. She woke with determination coursing through her veins. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about justice, but justice came with a cost. And the storm was only beginning to break. The Caldwell estate had never felt louder. It was Richard's annual charity gala, the crown jewel of his public image. The mansion pulsed with the sound of clinking glasses, laughter too polished to be sincere, and a string quartet weaving elegance into the air. Cameras flashed at every turn, journalists eager for a glimpse of the billionaire philanthropist. Naomi moved silently through the chaos, balancing trays of champagne flutes with practiced grace. But inside, her nerves burned like wildfire. Tonight was the night. Tonight, Richard's carefully constructed world would fracture. Cliff caught her eye across the room, his silent nod steadying her shaking hands. In her apron pocket, tucked deep, was the photo, the one that showed Richard's hand gripping her arm. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to plant doubt, enough to make the whispers impossible to ignore. Richard stood near the grand staircase, dazzling in a black tuxedo, his smile broad for the cameras. Margaret hovered nearby, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, sharp as ever, never left Naomi. Naomi swallowed hard, pressing her hand briefly against her belly. The child stirred inside her, as if urging her forward. Halfway through the evening, as speeches began, Richard took center stage. The chandelier's light bathed him in gold as he raised his glass. "To generosity," he declared. "To a future built on integrity, and to a world where every child has opportunity." Naomi's stomach twisted. Every child? Her grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles ached. The hypocrisy was too much to bear, and then it happened. The tray slipped from her hand. Glass shattered across the marble floor, the sound slicing through the elegant quiet like thunder. Gasps rippled. All eyes turned. Naomi stood frozen, chest heaving, as Richard's gaze bore into her, cold, furious. Cliff rushed forward to help, but Naomi shook her head. Her voice, though trembling, rang out clear. "Every child, Mr. Caldwell? Even the ones you try to deny?" The room fell into stunned silence. Richard's face paled, then flushed crimson. He stepped forward, his voice low, venomous. "Naomi, enough!" But Naomi's tears spilled freely now, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You think you can hide me, hide us! But this child, your child, deserves to be seen, deserves to be acknowledged." Murmurs spread like wildfire through the crowd. Cameras clicked, journalists leaning forward with hungry eyes. Margaret's lips curved into the faintest smile, satisfaction gleaming where heartbreak once lived. Richard's jaw tightened, his carefully built empire trembling beneath him. He glanced around at the donors, the press, the flashing lenses. His kingdom was crumbling in real time. "Lies," he hissed. "She's lying." Naomi's hand moved to her belly, steady and defiant. "Look me in the eye and say that. Look at this child one day and tell them they don't exist." From the crowd, Margaret's voice cut like a blade. "She's not lying," gasps erupted. Heads turned, Margaret stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble. Her eyes locked on her husband's. "I've watched you. I've known for months. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. You always leave a trail, Richard, and now the trail ends here." The room erupted in chaos. Journalists surged, questions flying. Guests whispered furiously, pulling out phones, snapping photos. Richard's mask cracked completely. "Margaret, you don't know what you're saying." But she held up her phone. On the screen glowed a photo Naomi had slipped to her earlier, the reflection, the hand on her arm. It wasn't everything, but with Naomi's words and Margaret's declaration, it became undeniable. "This is who you are," Margaret said coldly. "This is the man they're all funding tonight." Naomi's legs shook, but she stood taller than ever. The storm was no longer hers alone. It was public, inescapable. Richard lunged forward, his voice desperate. "You'll ruin everything!" Her reply was steady, firm. "You ruined it the night you decided my life didn't matter. The night you thought I was disposable. But this child," she pressed her palm against her belly, "will not grow up invisible." The silence that followed was suffocating. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were judging. Every second was a verdict. Naomi's contractions began suddenly, sharp and unrelenting. She gasped, her tray clattering to the floor again. Cliff was at her side instantly, guiding her to a chair. Panic surged through the room. Someone called for an ambulance. Richard stood frozen, horror etched across his face. Hours later, in the sterile light of the hospital, Naomi brought a baby boy into the world. The cries pierced the air, raw and alive. When the nurse placed the child in Naomi's arms, her tears flowed freely. She kissed the baby's tiny forehead, whispering, "You're safe. You're mine." And then the room stilled. The baby's eyes opened, clear, unmistakable, the same piercing blue as Richard Caldwell's. Gasps rippled through the hospital staff. Cliff, standing nearby, whispered, "There's your truth." Richard, pale and trembling, couldn't look away. His empire of denial shattered in that instant. No denial, no lawyers, no money could erase what was written in those eyes. By morning, the news had spread everywhere. Headlines screamed betrayal and hypocrisy. Photos of Richard storming out of the gala were plastered across every paper, every news site. Billionaire's secret exposed. Charity King's fall from grace. Baby's eyes reveal the truth. His empire crumbled. Stock prices plummeted. Board members demanded answers. Donors withdrew. The golden image of Richard Caldwell had been replaced by one word: fraud. And through it all, Naomi held her child close, her body exhausted but her spirit unbroken. She whispered to her son, "They'll never be able to deny you now. You'll never be invisible." But the actual impact was only beginning. The world had seen, the community had seen, and justice at last had begun to stir. The days that followed felt like a storm Naomi had once only dreamed of. For years she had lived in silence, invisible in a house built on wealth and lies. But now her truth was everywhere, splashed across headlines, whispered in boardrooms, dissected on television panels. Richard Caldwell, once untouchable, was suddenly very human. Very fragile. His empire trembled under the weight of scandal. Shareholders demanded his resignation. Charities distanced themselves. His phone, once filled with calls of admiration, now rang with threats of lawsuits and demands for accountability. For Naomi, the change was both terrifying and liberating. She wasn't hidden anymore. No more disguises, no more pretending. The child in her arms, Micah, was living proof that her existence mattered, that her voice could not be erased. The hospital became her sanctuary. Cliff visited daily, his steady presence reminding her that she hadn't fought this battle alone. He brought flowers one morning, setting them gently by her bedside. "You did what most would never dare," he said quietly. "You stood up to him. And now the whole world knows." Naomi smiled faintly, exhaustion heavy in her bones. "I didn't do it for me. I did it for Micah. He deserves a life where no one denies who he is." On the third day, Margaret entered Naomi's hospital room. For a long moment she said nothing, just looked at the child sleeping peacefully in Naomi's arms. Her eyes softened, but only for a flicker. "You've destroyed him," she said at last. Naomi's breath caught. She braced herself, unsure if Margaret had come to condemn her. But then Margaret added, "Good. It was long overdue." Naomi blinked, stunned. Margaret smoothed her gloves, her voice firm. "You gave me the weapon I needed to end years of silence. I won't pretend I did this for you, Naomi, but I'll admit, seeing you fight reminded me that I could fight too." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Raise him strong. The world will try to tell him who he is. Don't let them. And if you ever need protection..." Her voice trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Naomi's eyes welled with tears. For the first time, she felt something close to respect from the woman she once feared. Across the city, Richard Caldwell sat in his office. No longer a king, but a man cornered. His reflection in the window looked older, worn, stripped of power. The world had turned on him. Reporters camped outside his gates. Protesters held signs demanding justice, chanting Naomi's name as though she were the valid symbol of courage. For the first time in his life, Richard was the one being judged, the one people whispered about in disgust. And worst of all, he couldn't erase the image of his son's eyes that mirrored his own, eyes that proved he was not just guilty, but a father who had tried to bury his own blood. The silence of his mansion mocked him. The empire he had built for decades had been undone by a truth he could never deny. Naomi's story spread far beyond the tabloids. In community centers, in classrooms, in neighborhoods across the country, people spoke her name with pride. She became more than a maid. She became a symbol of resilience, of a voice too long silenced, finally rising. Messages flooded her phone. strangers offering support, organizations promising help. For once, Naomi wasn't alone in the fight. At night, rocking Micah to sleep, she whispered promises. "You'll never be invisible. You'll grow up knowing your worth no matter what the world tries to tell you." The baby stirred, his tiny hand gripping her finger. And in that fragile, decisive moment, Naomi felt something she hadn't in months. Peace. Richard Caldwell had lost everything that mattered to him. Naomi Harris had gained the one thing that mattered most, and the world, finally, had seen the truth. Naomi Harris's story is more than a scandal. It is a testament to courage, the courage to speak when the world demands silence, to stand when the decisive try to crush you, and to protect what is rightfully yours even when every instinct tells you to hide. Too often, society measures worth by wealth, status, or influence, but true power lies in integrity, in the unyielding voice of someone who refuses to be erased. Naomi was a maid in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of her child and eventually the world at large, she was a hero. Her journey reminds us that injustice thrives in silence. It thrives when people are afraid to speak, when the powerful assume their actions are invisible. But when truth is revealed, even the mightiest fall. Richard Caldwell's empire crumbled not because he lacked money or connections, but because he underestimated the resilience of someone he believed he could control. And yet, Naomi's story is not just about revenge or exposure. It is about protection, love, and legacy. Her fight was for her child, for Micah, who would grow up knowing that no one, not even a billionaire, could define his worth. In her courage, we see a universal lesson. Justice begins when we refuse to be complicit in our own erasure. What if this happened in your workplace, school, or neighborhood? What would you do if someone tried to erase your voice, silence your truth, or deny your very existence? Would you fight, speak, and protect those who depend on you, or would fear keep you quiet? Naomi's story challenges us to reflect and to act, to notice injustice, to stand up when wrongs are being done, and to remember that even the smallest voice can topple the tallest empire when it refuses to be silenced. Her legacy, and her child's, will remind the world that truth cannot be hidden forever. That courage has a way of finding the light, and injustice has a way of exposing itself. And in the end, the most critical question remains. If you were in Naomi's place, what would you do? Would you stay silent or would you stand, no matter the cost?